My name is Israel Joel Phillips. Today's date is January 13, 1975. And I should like to have transcriptions to be sent to my home address, which is 27-26 Cold, C-O-L-D, Spring Road, Far Rockaway, New York, zip code 11691. How and when did you first become a chaplain's assistant? I became a chaplain's assistant in Camp Phillips, Kansas. It was at that time that I belonged to I was a cattleman on the base, and the 186th General Hospital was passing through. We knew that they were going to Europe, and I wanted to go to Europe. I was young and patriotic at the time. I'm not ashamed of it now. And I asked to be transferred there, and the only place they could find for me was to work in their dental laboratory, and later on I was loaned to assist a chaplain. Who were the chaplains with whom you worked? At that time I worked with Chaplain Aaron Decter, who had come from Philadelphia. He was a young, very energetic chaplain, and we thought that we would be very successful together. Question 2. Describe your first encounter with the survivors of the Holocaust. Who are these people, concentration camp victims or individuals who hid during the war? My first contact was in France during, I should say, the winter of 44 to 45. I don't recall where Chaplain Decter was at the time, but somebody had told me that, and they knew that I was either a chaplain's assistant or somebody who could act in the absence of the chaplain. I was called in frequently to I help identify Jewish people and Jewish victims, as well as Jewish soldiers who had perished on a battlefield. And I also participated in the burial services. So, but this time somebody came to me and said that there was a Jew who had been hiding out on a farm somewhere between Saint-Mère-Église in France and Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer. There were a number of farming villages there on the Cotentin Peninsula, and that this Jew had managed to escape from some kind of camp and had been working on the farm. The farmers had hidden him out, and he had masqueraded as a farmer, a French farmer. One morning I managed to get up early, and I got into my Jeep, drove out there, and I asked around, and my conversational French was quite good, and I was directed to a particular farmhouse where I found this man in a very tattered tallis. It seems that I came early in the morning and he had been davening. I waited until he could speak to me, and then we had a sort of a very warm hello, and I spoke with him, and I saw that he was wearing very tattered shoes, almost in rags. I said that as soon as I could get away from my outfit, I was that time with Normandy base headquarters, I would come back to see him. And I more or less mentally measured the size of his foot. I came again early in the morning before my duty was supposed to start, and I had managed to get from the quartermaster, I managed to get a pair of new sort of semi-boots, about his size. When I came, I found him davening again, and he saw the shoes and his new shoes. There was sort of army brogans, and his face lit up. And he couldn't be mafsik, he couldn't speak at the time because he was a part of the service where he couldn't speak out. And all he could say was, oh, oh, oh. They were so nice, you know. When finally he did speak, he was very pleased, and he told me that he would wear them only on occasion. I said not to spare the boots, but to wear them all the time, and if necessary, I could always get him another pair. So he said he'd like to do something for me in return. And I said there was nothing he had to do for me. He wasn't obligated or obliged, and there was nothing I needed. So he says, well, let me give you two things. And the one one thing he gave me was a yellow badge, the one that the Nazis had distributed and made all the Jews wear. He gave me one, and he says, we were made to wear this, but now we should wear it out of pride rather than shame. And the second thing he gave me, he said in Yiddish, Ich will euch auslernen a Liedele, was mir haben gesungen in the Lagern, wenn man das genommen zum Teut. And he taught me the Ani Ma'amin that is became so well known. This fellow, I think, had come from Buchenwald. I don't know how he escaped from some labor gang. Somehow he managed to make his way to the coast, and there he was hid out. And I learned Ani Ma'amin, and I remember with what pathos he sang it. And those two things I got, a yellow badge and the song Ani Ma'amin. With what army unit were you involved during the period in which you helped the survivors of the Holocaust? I was with Normandy Base Headquarters. This was the Army headquarters that supervised Cherbourg, Rouen, and harbors. And these were the harbors and the ports that fed the invading army. It was also Normandy Base Headquarters that ran the Red Bull Highway, which helped to supply the advance. What other experiences did you and the chaplains have with the remnants of European Jewry after this initial encounter? We met very few Jews in and around Cherbourg. Cherbourg was never a very large city, a very large town at the time, and whatever Jews there were probably were hauled away. We did, however, while we were there, we were told of the tragic death of a Jew. Also managed to hide out in a small village. And he was doing well until some American soldiers got there. One of them was somewhat drunk, and in a drunken stupor seems to have met this person. I don't know who he was, I don't remember his name, but he was stabbed and he died. The soldier eventually was court-martialed. I don't know what happened to him. The man was buried, and I recalled how the villagers came. We were asked to come and officiate at the funeral. That by this time, yes, it was Chaplain Decter and myself. And I recall these villagers, how they came in all scrubbed and shiny and in their Sunday best to pay their respects, and how with the understanding that the man would eventually be exhumed as soon as other parts of Europe are liberated. He was buried in the Christian cemetery, and I think eventually he was again reburied somewhere near Paris. We had other experiences with Jews, and that came a little later, chiefly in Belgium. Over there, when we moved up from France, we moved to Belgium, the Jews began to come out of hiding, the few who remained. And we found quite a number of orphanages in and around Brussels. We managed to set up, we had our army post exchanges where we bought our candies and cigarettes and soaps and various toilet articles. So in the post exchange we set up barrels, and the chaplain and I and a few of the officers and men, we set up barrels, and something for the kiddies was assigned there, and servicemen would throw in 1 or 2 chocolate bars or a piece of soap, and soap was very expensive and had a lot of value at the time in Europe. And these things were distributed to the various orphanages. I recall one particular orphanage was run by a Mr. Bamberger in the Rue de la Régence in Brussels. And we took them some sweaters, army sweaters, and army blankets, and candies. I and another soldier, Irving Goldberg, who was from Chicago, seemed to have been their favorites because we came so frequently. And they referred to me as Rib New York, and he was Rib Chicago. The chaplain was Rabbi Benjamin Gorelick. At that time, he was the rabbi in Albany, Sons of Israel congregation, and I think now, presently, he's in Detroit, perhaps very soon to retire. We also had other adventures with Jewry in Brussels. We met quite a number of families who have come out of hiding, some who began to trickle back from other places. We had an interesting episode with a Catholic priest who came from Namur, walked all the way because there was still no transportation, to tell us that a Jewish woman had given birth over there and requested the services of a mohel, and with Chaplain Gorelick supply a mohel. We looked high and low, we found one, and with Army convenience and Army conveyance, we sent them out there to do the job. It was very nice of this priest to have walked at least 35 miles or so to bring us that message. There was another Catholic priest who had hidden out quite a number of children in one of his monasteries there, and they were under the Nazis' eye, as he said that they were Catholic children and orphans, and he was taking care of them. In truth, he even kept seems some kind of a teacher for them, who taught them the Aleph Beis, some rudimentary elements of reading, and some basic laws of Judaism, so that he was really one of those, Hasidei Umas Ha'olam, who did what he could to save the lives as well as the religious and the spiritual lives of these children. One of the outstanding people there was a Madame Perelman, who had hidden out some Jewish children and moved them from cellar to cellar during the Nazi occupation. She was helped by a young Belgian Catholic girl named Jeanne Damon. And Jeanne Damon used to date SS men and more or less find out from them where and when certain raids would take place. And if she heard that some raid was planned to take place anywhere near where the children were hidden at the time, they would be moved at night to some other basement, some other cellar in some other area of Brussels. And when we met up with Jan, we asked her what in particular drew her to the Jewish people, and she said their spirit. Our parents did not object to her involvement, and as a matter of fact, her story reads almost like a novel, because I and Chaplain Gorelick befriended her, and then she had a sort of a personal problem. She became very much involved with Jews and eventually fell in love with a young Jewish man who came back from one of the concentration camps. This young Jewish fellow was the son of a doctor. It seems his parents had come to visit in the United States shortly before the war broke out and was stranded here, and he could not rejoin them. He was engaged to a Jewish girl whom he had given up for lost. And he and Jan became very close, and there was talk that they would marry. Then word came back that in one of the camps, which had eventually become a DP camp, his fiancée, whom he had given up for lost, had turned up, very much alive, and he did not know what to do. Should he continue with his association with Jeanne Damon, or should he go to his fiancée? Well, Jan was very brokenhearted, and she said, well, I think that your first love needs you more, because she lost her family and has nobody to depend upon. And she thought that he should go back to her, which he did. And she, in her loneliness, was eventually sent for by his parents, the doctor who was in the United States. She eventually came to the United States shortly after the war. I believe it was in 1946, the summer of 46. And the United Jewish Appeal heard about her and gobbled her up, and she went on tour for UJA, raising large sums of money. As a matter of fact, she even spoke for UJA in Albany. When I came up to Albany in October, Rabbi Gerlich told me that I had just missed her. These were our experiences with the survivors of the Holocaust, in particular in Belgium. Were you involved in getting packages from the United States and distributing them to the survivors? If so, please state how this developed. We did not, as far as I can recall, we did not do that. At least I and Rabbi Gorelick, Chaplain Decter had been transferred to some other outfit by this time, and Chaplain Gorelick took his place. We did not do that. We did hear from the Vad Hatzalah. The Jewish Welfare Board had been sending various religious articles for us, which we also distributed to some of the members of the community, the Jewish community. We did distribute matzahs and wine. Some of the other things I do not recall that we did, but I do believe that we tried to raise quite a bit of things from among the soldiers themselves, and many Jewish and non-Jewish soldiers contributed. For the winter of 44, 45, and 45, 46, we were able to supply these orphanages quite well. At least I think it was well. It's not as much as should have been done, but it was quite a sizable thing that we were able to do. And we had clothing for them. Of course, much of it was much too large on these children. The smallest size that the Army had was a little large, but it kept them somewhat warm if it didn't fit so well or too comfortably. How were you able to provide food and other necessities to these survivors? Primarily from the PXs with the barrels that we mentioned. A little later, we were joined by the Jewish Brigade, which was stationed in Tournai, Belgium. And with them and with some elements of the British Army, we were able to raise quite a bit of things which we distributed. The brigade, the Jewish Brigade, had a little more leeway than we did, although we had more supplies. The U.S. Army is pretty well stocked. And we were able together to do quite a heroic effort, at least for the Jews of Brussels and Antwerp. What was the response of the Jewish and Gentile DGIs when the chaplain or you needed their assistance in helping the survivors? To what extent was your Jewish personnel involved in helping the survivors prior to and during the chaplain's involvement? Well, the Jewish soldiers were very willing, and the Gentile soldiers were not unwilling. As word of the death camps came to us, we all felt that this was really a very worthwhile project to help those who survived. Jew and Gentile pitched in, and there was no anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic feeling that I had encountered. Everybody knew me for an Orthodox person. I davened with talis and tefillin quite openly. And our association was quite good. Gentile soldiers were quite generous, and they responded to whatever was being collected. And there were collections for non-Jewish orphanages and orphans as well, and for other people, and they responded very nicely. I recall an incident that happened but shortly when we moved up to Belgium, where a old Gentile woman came to the headquarters and asked if there was a rabbi, and I don't recall. I believe it was that Chaplain Decter had left and Chaplain Gorelick had not yet come, and I was on the road somewhere, but they managed to get some other Jewish personnel to go with her, and she took them up to to her attic, and there in a corner, in old newspapers, she had wrapped, and the date was sometime in 1940. She had 2 Sifrei Torah. She had 2 Torahs which she hid, wrapped the newspapers, and put them aside for the day when the Jews would come out of hiding, and when they would be free of the Nazi yoke, she would return them to whatever survivors there were of the Jewish community. It was one of the highlights of our Army experience to have this woman come to us and show us that she had hidden out and wrapped 2 Torahs in her attic. What was the American Army's reaction to your activities on behalf of Europe and Jewry on all levels? We were with a headquarters, and the headquarters, it was an Army base headquarters, which was quite a large headquarters and on a high level. Our superiors were SHAEF, which was Supreme Allied Headquarters, and the personnel in the headquarters are usually quite literate. Generally, they're called from the large urban centers in the United States. Most of them are with college backgrounds. While we had a few individuals, a few soldiers who probably came from smaller towns and with limited academic background, those were very few. So that the people we had who came from the large urban centers were accustomed to a polyglot sort of society or environment, to a multifaceted environment of people with different varying backgrounds and ethnic and religious and so on. Racial didn't come into yet because the Army was still segregated at the time. So that the Army's reaction to our activities was either they looked on it very passively without objection, and very frequently they even participated and helped us, so that we did not feel that we were hampered in any way. Did the chaplain have any contact with the JDC, and if so, how would you describe the chaplain's association with them? I'm not aware that Chaplain Gorelik had contact with the Joint, although I know he carried on quite an extensive correspondence. I didn't carry on his correspondence for him, although I assisted him, and my assistance to him was chiefly as a driver, because officers were not allowed to drive, even if they could, and I was a non-commissioned officer, so I was allowed to drive. I also helped him with services. There was a secretarial pool which the chaplains used. We had 3 chaplains. The headquarters chaplain, the base headquarters chaplain, was a Protestant, Chaplain Shea, and Chaplain Ray, John R. Ray, R-H-E-A. Then we had a Chaplain Huss, who was the Catholic chaplain, and Chaplain Benjamin Gorelik, who was the Jewish chaplain. Now, he must have had some correspondence with the Joint. I am not aware of it. How did he view his role? I believe he, if at all, if he made contact with organizations in the States, he probably saw himself as the liaison between whatever is done there and the contacts with the people, the Jewish, whatever remnant Jewish community there was, he was their contact with the outside organizations. How would you evaluate their relationship and the efforts of the JDC workers? The JDC workers were very good indeed, and they tried to get us far forward as they could, and as the camps were being liberated, they were not far behind. From what I saw of them, they were zealous, they were very devoted, and some of them even helped organize Zionist rallies in the large cities that were eventually liberated. And I recall, I don't know whether it was JDC workers who did it, but I'm sure they had a hand in it. These rallies were primarily for getting the Jews to want to leave Europe. Some of them were not aware themselves of how big the Holocaust really was. I remember one elderly Zionist who spoke at a tremendous rally in Belgium. His name was Zerubbabel. I saw this gray-haired, long, gray-bearded patriarch with a heavy head of hair and no yarmulke, speaking a beautiful Yiddish, and encourage the Jews to leave and to come to what was then Palestine. So JDC workers worked primarily up front where the DP camps were, and I think some of them had something to do with the rear echelon as well. Did the chaplain work with the Jewish agency during your stay in Europe? What was the nature of this involvement? We began to meet people from Palestine, and of course we had the Jewish Brigade not far, and we met very frequently in Brussels, and especially at the Jewish Hospitality Committee, which was run by the British. We davened together over there Friday nights, and we had our Shabbos meals there. We began to meet with members of the Jewish Agency for Palestine at the time. Chaplain Gorelick himself was not involved in this, in what I'm about to say, but one of the chaplains who was a major in the Army, the rank of major, and I believe was with General Patch's 7th Army group. He seemed like he was a real West Pointer, a fine Jewish chaplain. I don't recall his name, but he was going to make the Army his career, and it seems that he had everything going for him. The Army was, any person who wanted the Army as a career, the Army was very selective at the time. And regardless of the rank these chaplains had, and our Protestant base chaplain, Chaplain Ray, was a lieutenant colonel. He wanted the Army very badly, but he thought that he would not make it because of his poor teeth. Well, this Jewish chaplain was going to make it, but he did something very heroic. As we look back on it now, we can see how heroic it was. The shooting war in Europe was over, and the Army had stockpiled great supplies, amounts of supplies, weapons, and so on, in various depots all around Europe. And it seems that this chaplain had signed requisitions to the ordnance that trucks would pull up and load up with various rifles and shells and ammunition. And these vouchers or these requisitions were filled. The trucks would pull away, Army trucks would pull away, and eventually the stuff would be transferred to the Jewish Brigade trucks, which would take them and various DPs down to the Mediterranean, and eventually to be shipped across to Palestine for the eventual showdown that the Zionists knew was going to come. And it was very courageous of this chaplain to do what he did, although it was outside the realm of the law. But those stockpiles were not going to be shipped back to the United States, and much of it was beginning to rust and deteriorate. They were exposed to the elements. The war was over, and well, maybe this is a sort of rationalization, but it would have gone to waste anyway. Eventually, the chaplain was caught, and he was given the option to try to stay in the Army and face a court-martial, or to resign. From what I heard, he eventually chose resignation, and that was the end of his career, or the career he wanted to make in the Army. But I'm sure he was compensated with the knowledge that his act probably saved many, many lives. For whatever ammunition and weapons did get across, some of it may have been intercepted, but whatever did get across, at least was able to supply the Haganah with some minimal sense of security. Did the chaplain work with UNRWA? Please tell me about specific experiences and your general impression of their work. I left Europe shortly thereafter. I left in January of 1946, And Chaplain Grelick stayed on. I had come to Europe somewhat earlier, and I was mustered out because of the points I had accumulated. There are some other Jewish chaplains had come, and they must have worked with UNRWA. I am not aware because I was by that time being processed for eventual demobilization and discharge, so I'm not aware. Was the chaplain involved in Aliyah Bet? If yes, please be specific. How would you characterize his role in this work? The Jewish Brigade in Tournai was a marvelous group and very fine, devoted young men in it. But they were part of the British Army, and they had problems. The British Army was not particularly generous with supplies. So one of the things that we managed to do was to be able to requisition gasoline for them, and they used their lorries, their trucks. And with their trucks and our gasoline, they were able to come to the various DP camps and sort of smuggle certain people out into these trucks across Europe to the Mediterranean and try to get them into Palestine. Much of that illegal immigration came at that time, and the brigade in Tournai had something to do with it, and our chaplain and we were able to have a minor role because we at least supplied the essence for moving their trucks. Question 13. With what other Jewish organization was the chaplain involved during this period? Describe this involvement. I am not sure, not carrying on his correspondence and seeing it only from time to time. I don't know what other Jewish organizations. I believe that, oh yes, they were involved with the United Synagogue, with the Jewish Theological Seminary. And when they came across they came across some books or volumes which they thought might be of interest to the seminary, even if they were in doubt whether it had any kind of Jewish value or historical value, they would save it, pick it up, buy it, or just take it, wherever, depending upon where it was, and then save it, crate it, cart it, and ship it off to the seminary. I believe that the Jewish Theological Seminary Library grew very nicely during this period from the acquisitions and the various volumes that were found in the destruction of Europe by the various chaplains who probably had some association with the Jewish Theological Seminary. Of course, they had association with the Jewish Welfare Board. Some of them saw fit to correspond or write articles for some of the newspapers that abounded in those days. And so there was liaison between the army rabbi and the people at home, and I believe this was a good thing. 14. Was the chaplain ever called upon to smooth relations between DPs and the U.S. Army? Please be specific about places, dates, and people involved. Again, I am not aware because I was sent home rather early after the shooting war was over. I had wanted to work in the Army of Occupation, but they said that if I chose to do so, and I was going to get a commission, they were going to make me a lieutenant, I would then have to stay a little more than a year. And I wasn't too anxious to do that. Fortunately, I did come home when I did because I was privileged to stay with my father for about a year before he passed away. So I was not there. I did hear that there were sometimes certain difficulties between the U.S. Army and the DPs. They had problems. They didn't want to stay in the camps because it reminded them too much of what there was there before. And I do believe, having heard that the chaplains did come in and work out various problems. I am not aware who they were at this time because I was not there myself, and it's been quite a number of years. 15. Was the chaplain involved in the work within the concentration camps? Many chaplains were. Shortly before I left Europe, about a shipment of chaplains had come in, and in that shipment there were at least 10 Jewish chaplains. This was a bonanza because Jewish chaplains were very scarce during the war. There were quite a number of them there, but they were spread over so many fronts, and there were many Jewish soldiers who hardly ever saw a Jewish chaplain. I might say that Chaplain Decter and Chaplain Gorelick saw fit to travel all over France and Belgium and parts of Germany and conduct services, and they had they were like itinerant preachers who had a certain route, and they made sure that at least once a month they hit various various organizations or army units that had sizable Jewish personnel. Some units had none, some had so few that by going there they would have missed out going where there were certainly more soldiers. I recall one Pesach where Chaplain Decter went to one camp to conduct Seder services, and I went to another, and this way we were able to cover as much as we could. Now, as far as as far as the chaplains involved in the work within the concentration camps, this I was not aware. I know that they were there. Oh yes, these 10 chaplains were a big bonanza, and we were all excited that so many Jewish chaplains, such a concentration of them, were there and were coming. And I and Chaplain Gorelick went out to meet them at the boat. The boat came to, at that time, I believe it came to Rouen. And we gave them a big Kabbalas Ponim, and of course they were all anxious. They had just come from the States, and they were going to participate in the Army of Occupation. And I recall reading that many of them did some very fine work. They did work within the concentration camps and and in Germany in the Army of Occupation. Give as many examples as possible with specific dates, places, and people involved. I wish I knew and remembered these names. I remember there was a chaplain, Spyro, who spoke with a very heavy accent. It seems that he had come from Poland to the United States shortly before the war, and then had gotten into the Army and came now to the Army as a chaplain. I believe I would say that he was in Europe probably now after he had left it. Between the time he had left it as a civilian and come back as a chaplain was about 4 or 5 years. And he was very effective. He learned French in 3 months. He didn't know a word when he got there. I took him around to various bookstores, and he came out with arm's lengths of books. There were other chaplains, and I can't recall their names. 16, was the chaplain ever involved in collecting guns, ammunition, and or money to be sent to Palestine? I am not aware that Chaplain Gorelick was so involved. He might very well have been, but this would have been a very clandestine kind of operation. I mentioned the major, the chaplain from General Patch's 7th Army Group, who was so involved. We were involved with another kind of weapon, and namely human. We tried to get them out of the DP camps and toward Palestine. Many borders were closed to them, and that was the only thing, and even that was closed. Now, as far as collecting guns, the chaplains might have been involved, perhaps when they came back to the United States. I know I was. When we came back to the United States, I joined up with Masada, which was the youth affiliate of the Zionist Organization of America. And in 1947 and early 48, we went around as Masadaniks. We went around collecting various souvenirs, army souvenirs that soldiers had brought back, pistols and rifles and so on, collecting them and crating them, taking them to various collection points after we had visited various homes. And these were eventually crated and smuggled and shipped to Palestine. Whether Chaplain Gorelick had done this in Europe, I am not aware. 17. Was the chaplain involved in working with other Jewish chaplains on the Jewish refugee problem? This I know he did. He worked with refugees himself, and he also was able to brief many of these chaplains who came fresh from the States and from chaplain school to take over various duties in the Army of Occupation. How would you characterize the role of the American Jewish chaplain during this period, 1944-48? I would say that he was a marvelous mover, and at the same, he gave encouragement to American personnel. See, the Jew is rather timid, even in the Army and with an Army uniform on. He's timid. The U.S. Army during World War II, as we look back on it, was a very autocratic sort of establishment, and it wanted to control the person, life and soul, body and soul. And the articles of war and the various things were read to us over and over again, and we were awed by it, and we felt very helpless in this large organization, which was in a way rather acted as a very kind of a despotic benefactor to us. Some of us were unhappy in the Army, and we griped a bit, but we felt a little insecure. As I look back upon my Army experience, I think differently. But the fact that a Jewish chaplain was there who sometimes could smooth the way for us, and sometimes couldn't, but the mere fact that his presence was there was of immense help to the Jewish military man. At the same time that he gave us encouragement, many of them were very good organizers, and they were able to start moving things for the Jewish communities in Europe. Chaplain Dechter was the first, I believe, to come out with a publication in formerly occupied Europe. I helped him that time. It was, of course, primarily his. He printed a publication called Tekiah, and it was an English newspaper for Army personnel. We printed it in some small printer. I remember we having to go through a gate and in the backyard in Cherbourg, and the issues of Tekiah came out, and they were distributed to the various units, and the Jewish soldiers there picked it up, and there were stories there from the Talmud and the Bible and about holidays and about what was going on in the States. And various people were encouraged to write little articles. Of course, primarily it was Chaplain Dechter's. Chaplain Gorelick organized the first High Holy Day services in occupied Europe, and I recall those High Holy Day services. I was the Bal Musaf. We had services in the Palais de Beaux-Arts in Brussels. We had it for American personnel, but of course many civilians came in, and I recall how they came in, and with some fear and trepidation, some of them still with crosses around their necks, and the tears that flowed that Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is something that I will never forget. It was quite an experience, the mingling of American Army personnel, some British personnel. The brigade was not yet there, and these Jewish civilians joined in one in an expression of thanks and I think some optimism for the future in this High Holy Day service. This Rabbi Gorelick was instrumental in organizing. How would you characterize the role of the chaplains with whom you served? Their role, as I mentioned, was a very beneficial one to the Army, to the job to be done, to the Jewish Army personnel, and of course, chiefly to the Jews and what was left of the Sheris HaPleito, this in the Jewish communities that they came to. They provided them with the physical necessities, what they could. I wouldn't say that they did everything, but what they could, and wherever possible, tried to help with the authorities to regain certain lost property and tried to rejoin families that were separated. I myself was a little instrumental there with a Jewish mother whose daughter seemed to have lost contact with the family. And I was very fortunate in being able to pick up a phone, calling Frankfurt, and sure enough, I didn't know, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but I called, and one of the officers who answered there says, "Why, this girl is working right here in our office," and I put her on with her mother, and I got a big hug and a kiss out of it from the mother. I think that what the chaplains did was very beneficial indeed. 19. What do you think might have happened if the chaplain with whom you served had not been there at the time? Some of us were a little timid, but we began to catch on after we saw our chaplains in operation. I'm sure that many of the services provided American Jewish personnel would not have been there, the Sidorim, the Friday night services. And I'm certain, too, that some of the projects that they did and initiated for the Sheris HaPleito might not have gotten off the ground. Some of the counseling, the liaison between parents in the States and their sons in the Army might not have been going on. There definitely would have been a great void had they not been there. What do you think might have happened if the American Jewish chaplains had not been in Europe to help the survivors of the Holocaust? Some of us tend to forget that the democracies at that time were not quite as democratic or as liberal as we would have hoped and liked them to be. Even the United States was rather reluctant to take people in, and I believe the fact that the chaplains were there and were able to pacify Jewish passions, anxieties, frustrations,